there were so many that lost their businesses during that time. Good morning from Spotlight Publishing. We are just delighted to have you here today. This is where we bring in experts to talk about the best practices to keep our books out there and shining in the world. And we also showcase our authors. And today we are celebrating Carole Stizza. I'm going to bring her into the audience. Carole, it's a pleasure to have you here today, and it's quite a celebration to bring this work that you're doing to the world. And we're talking about the ASK framework. And in the ASK framework, Carole, her book is quite interesting. She writes with the goal of empowering her readers to embrace their own unique individuality and to communicate how much they value others, because success at work depends on it. And we see so much, especially since COVID, how much things have changed and how important it is to truly value what we are. She's a contributing author to Compassion at Work and Coach Wisdom, Volume 1, and she pulls from a very, very rich career in human resources, executive coaching, and supporting a military family across the U.S. for 26 years. I'm sure those were long years sometimes with all the stuff that you were doing. And she holds a master's in applied industrial organizational psychology from Colorado State University. With that, we welcome you, Carole. And it's been so fun to kind of work with you through this process, and you do so many of the right things. But let's talk about this book of yours and what inspired you to write this book, and how do you serve in our world?
Well, as Oprah so beautifully said, make your mess your message. And we want to console a lot of times people at work that are having a very interesting experience. And I had an unexpected experience in a performance review. I'd never had problems. All of them were great, glowing. And I walked in to a lunch that suddenly was somebody else's time or desire to shine. And they proceeded to kind of throw me under the bus to make themselves look better. There was quite a few different hierarchical positions in this performance review, and I knew better. And I know they knew better, but it was kind of like watching a show. Like, you're just like, what is happening?
What's going on here?
And I think the most fundamental thing I learned from that was it is not taught or in our habits to naturally speak to our own value at work. We are used to complimenting others and lifting up the team and sharing celebration. And women or men are taught differently in the conversation. We're trying to kind of bring that more equal as we share stories. And I talked to quite a few people after that. They were like, yeah, if that had happened to me, I wouldn't have known how to step in and redirect the conversation. I wouldn't have known to say, hey, by the way, the last project we did, I know the one thing I really did my team appreciated was this. I'd like to talk about that. Can we share examples of that? Or anything to redirect in a way that allows you professionally to level up the conversation in the right way it's supposed to go. And we are also not taught to ask questions about gaining positive information about ourselves, as if that's, taboo. We've all been taught, let your work speak for you. And yes, always do great work. But there will always be times as you progress up into a company, whether it's time and seat or you want to lift up, that you need to be able to gather information about how other people perceive you in the best light, not just areas for improvement, and know to include that when you have those conversations.
That's beautiful. So, who did you write this book for, basically?
I wrote this book for people like myself. I think that's what we write books for. Is like, I wish I knew when. I wish I had this book. Because when I went looking for the information, like what should I have done better, I couldn't find it. I could find a lot of information on how to go get feedback, but it was really about, asking for areas of improvement, which we get tired of that. And it's really opening the door to people trying to be helpful, picking out negatives instead of what's the one thing I do really well that I should never change, that I should always honor. And so that I understand that when change is asked, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I really had to go find this information. And that's where research was great. But back to your question of who I write this for, anybody who wants to move up, move forward in an organization, or gain new clients. A lot of times clients want to know why to hire you, and you have to be able to share stories of your value. Here's the value I bring to you, not I'm happy, I'm smile, I'm easy to work with. Those are descriptors. We want to know the value you're going to add. And we all most often can't genuinely make that up. We have to gather that information from other people as third-party credibility so I can say, yeah, this is the value my clients have found before. And if this is what you want, great. So new clients, talking with peers, talking with executives if you're not there yet, but being able to share also with your team. Hey, here's a story I'd like to share. This is where my experience comes from. This is what I learned from that. So now they know what you bring to the table and where your motivation comes from. It's a better way of sharing your experience without bragging, or just gloating.
Well, it's interesting how this works because, you're looking at professional and development and really bettering yourself. But there's so much that comes from conversation where you get the positive feedback, and instead of being the being spoken to where there's a lot of criticism, and you're left speechless, like with your mouth hanging open, like, wow, I didn't know that. And then to realize there's a whole better way to even really brag on ourselves in a different way. And it applies really to if somebody's in leadership, in maybe working for even a Fortune 500 company, or in a business for themselves in coaching. We still need that positive feedback and need good ways to respond.
So there you brought up three really good points. One was when you get negative information, criticism. The other was knowing how to talk about your value with in a professional way on any level. And third was being able to speak for yourself, whether you're in an organization or by yourself. So the first one, the negative information, you actually have permission to control it. And there's a really great way to do that. When someone comes to you and says, oh, by the way, you did this or didn't do this, or someone thought, you literally can say, hey, can you give me an example of how you saw that? Because if they didn't have the personal experience, then it's gossip. And you can
Great.
If it is their personal experience, you're getting to see it through their perspective, and it allows you to understand how to clear up that context.
Right. You talk about in your book, you talk about a paradigm shift from the typical negative experience to something that can be turned into really positive. How does that apply here?
Well, so there's two ways, right? So if you're going and asking specifically for what's one thing I do really well for that last client we had, can you give me an example? A lot of people want to be helpful, and they'll go, oh, you did this. Oh, but, right? People feel like there's a pro and a con, like I need to give you both. You literally can say, oh, I am so grateful that you have more to add, but I only can handle one thing today. Leave it to me. is it okay if I come back to you? And everybody's like, oh yeah, yeah, they feel very hopeful. The second is if you ask for a positive and they don't know how to give it. Like they've never been asked for what you do right, but they've got like a list of 10 things that they thought would be helpful that you do wrong. And you literally can say, I am so grateful that you have areas for me to improve in. Today, though, I need to collect things that I'm doing well. So I understand and honor them, and I'll come back to you. You literally can thank them and stop it and come back to them when you're ready. And we're all ready at some point to grow. We need new challenges. We learn how to be better. Then you'll know exactly who to go to and say, remember when you started to give me some areas for improvement, I wasn't ready. Now I'm ready. They will not forget what it is that they offered. But the point to answer your question was, even if somebody comes to you with an area of improvement, it's your boss. You can't cut them off.
Right.
And they say, here's what happened. You can ask for an example, which is not common. We don't go around asking for examples to see it through other people's perspectives. When you do that, they feel extremely valued. So you're automatically leveling up the trust in this conversation. But you also can take it a little bit a step further with how and what questions. What would you like? What's the one thing you'd like me to do differently? What are you looking for the next time that we get together and have this client? How would you like me to take the first step to change? Those what and how questions keep that conversation going, and it takes whatever it is they want you to improve and it paints a better picture so that you can walk away knowing what to do instead of feeling beaten up in the moment. And we're just not practiced at helping people have those types of conversations.
I think one of the things, and sorry, I interrupted you. I think that unless we learn this strategy, sometimes we can get really defensive when a conversation starts, and we kind of regret it afterwards because we could have responded so much better. But this book, the way you've written it, it gives so many really good pointers on a more positive way to respond, so that it also doesn't reflect bad on yourself, but it also kind of gives the person that is speaking the words a little different perspective too, and the feedback can be very, very valuable. And I think it probably gives them a little pause to say, "Wow, this is pretty cool what she just said."
You do want to step into a conversation, and I think one of the things I got was privileged to really absorb was that anytime somebody comes to you with information, especially if it's negative information, it's never about you at all. Mm-hmm. It's about how whatever happened made them feel. So let's say they're projecting onto you, or you were there, or you were the person speaking at the presentation and the client wasn't happy and they come in, you didn't cover this and you didn't cover this. Often you can say, okay, I really want to understand how to improve, right? So you're just owning it. It sounds like this situation frustrated you, right? You're just going to hand this content. Given what you've told me, what's frustrating you the most right now? And the moment you ask them that, it allows them, and of course you bring it to the most, not everything, just one thing, allows them to kind of like, they may feel comfortable telling you. It depends on the relationship. If they're a boss and they're keeping things close to their chest, they may not. But they'll be able to say, well, the thing that's frustrating me most, they might still be projecting onto you. But you can say, can you give me an example of what you would like to see differently?
Oh, that's perfect.
Just step into it. Don't take it personally. Keep it right there in the middle of the table, metaphorically, and say, can you give me an example of how you want to see this differently? And they'll either have something or they'll have to think about it. And they may say, it's a fair question. Let me think on it. I'll come back to you. Okay, great, right? You're wanting to step up into this, not step back, not be defensive. And I think this book, the whole point of this book is to give you permission with a tool to step in and be the professional you want to be client-centered, be, the professionally centered with your boss. If you are the boss, then it allows you to step into better conversations with those you lead. So from any perspective, it just gives you a way to not own it if somebody's projecting negativity onto you, but to still honor the effort and step into it with better words, frankly.
Right, yeah. And it's easy to feel like you're under attack, and there are better ways. And I think that your coaching, because you do work with people and training on this process, so you have a couple of really interesting life experiences that you would talk about in your book that bring these points home. And I think there was one example when you were 6 that when you first experienced the benefit of this framework. Do you mind to share that?
Sure. When I was 6, I didn't know that this was the framework.
Yeah, you're
But
going
as
like,
I
huh?
started researching this, and you're like, when did I have I ever had this experience? And I was really surprised to find that it drove me right back to that day. So when I was 6, we were in a horrible car accident that took half my family, and I was the only human left standing. I crawled out of the car. I was 6. I'm standing on the side of the road. And I suddenly had the trigger to ask where my brother was. My brother was 3. He was sitting right next to me in the back seat, and I hadn't seen him. Of course, I'm in shock. So I just started asking where my brother was, and nobody had to listen to me. And so I kept asking. It was just like, no, just somebody tell me that they've seen him or what's happened. And so I kept asking, and finally someone said, I'm just going to call over one of the paramedics. And they did, and they said, she keeps asking for a 3-year-old little brother. And they're like, we haven't seen any little boy. And everything stopped, and everybody jumped back in like, oh my, is any field? Because the car rolled quite a bit. And they did find him underneath the back seat. It was a bench, and he was in the springs, and they stopped the tow truck. I mean, it was just, I didn't know how significant that was until years later when we somehow got on the topic and we're talking about it as adults, to hear the other relatives help me understand what happened. Because the nurse that came to talk to me afterwards said, Carole, thank you for continually asking about your brother. That was something that we could focus on, and by focusing on, we found him, and by finding him, he's going to be okay, because otherwise the tow truck would have pulled the car away and nobody would have known to ask for him. So it was just one of those, I have had, where she was really clear with me on what the context was, a conversation. She told me the one thing I did really well and gave me an example of how it brought about the results. And so it was just really interesting for me to look back on that simple conversation that stuck with me, and to realize it landed so well with me, even as a little 6-year-old, shocked, sitting on the side of the road, waiting, to see what was going to happen next. I remember that conversation because it was so clear. I think all of us can have better conversations with that type of template. Make sure that what you're talking about is clearly voiced, the context, because not everybody's in the same headspace you are in the moment. And offer or ask for one thing of most important in that conversation, and then ask for an example or be able to showcase an example. So what she did for me was like a leader coming to tell you something you've done really well. Yesterday in the meeting, here was the one thing you did so well, and here's the example of how I know it landed. That's what she did for me as a 6-year-old. When I'm now grown up and a professional, I can go to anybody and make sure there's context and say, what's the one thing I did really well, the most meaningful or most important point you took away from this? And can you give me an example of how that landed for you, how you saw it? And it was really brilliant in my world of absorbing this, that I could put this topic way back to when I was 6. And that hit home for me.
It would, and that would be something you would never forget, because it was, the very fact that your brother's alive,
Yeah, he's a retired
it
Marine.
would have not have happened.
Yeah, he did. It was great.
So you also have stories of employee experiences written about in the book. Are those real stories? And can you share a few of them?
All of them are real. I do change the names to hold confidentiality for people I've worked with. If I couldn't contact them, I shared the story with different names. I think one of the most monumental example I could share today on the context of this book is that I have worked, I was an HR consultant at the time, with people who came out of a performance review very dejected. And the thing about performance reviews, it's supposed to be a conversation. And so often we go into it almost like we're subjected to be the audience, not in a conversation. And my conversation with one gentleman he was just completely upset. His idea of performance review, when you do good work, you get top marks. He didn't know that the boss he had never gave top marks. He didn't believe in him. A 4 out of 5 is the best you're doing for him. And this gentleman was like, I'm still getting a 4 out of 5. I'm busting my butt. And it would have been really helpful for him to say, hey, I'm looking at my performance rating here as the context. What's the one thing I can do to bring my score from a 4 to a 5? And he would have learned from his boss, I never give 5s. You're top of everything. And that would have been really good for him to hear. But when he saw the 4 out of 5, he shut down. He didn't ask any questions.
And that's important, really, because how else are you to learn? And why is it that we prefer to ask ways to improve rather than to really concentrate on what we already do well?
Well, it's because that's how we're taught in school. How do I make a grade? Right. How do I meet the deadline? That's
our world, isn't it?
Right. The game of school is not the game of work. We are taught the game of school to get into high school, to get into college. But there's some point between the beginning of college and the end of college, or even into high school, you're not taught the game of work. And it's completely set of different rules, different play pieces, everything. And we are taught to ask how to get the better grade, how to get in, almost the entrance to something more. We're not taught to say, what's the one thing I do right? What's the one thing I should never change? Because in an educational system, you're always learning.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah. And we are learners. But our brain only is a scanner for only 2 things: where to be accepted and respected, or where to learn. If I am accepted and respected here, where's the next place I want to be accepted and respected, and what do I need to learn to get there? There's no place for negativity. So school was in the guise of helping us learn, but at some point you have to perform and know what to hold onto that you do well and build upon. And we have not been given.
None of us have been trained that way, and we don't get that in school. There's a lot of things we don't get in school.
Yeah, but there's no transition. Even in college, they don't teach you how to go and collect what I like to call your superhero stories, to keep a file for the things people have complimented you on, the things worked well. And we're not taught to ask for that information either. And we need to. It's really important for us to understand how other people appreciate time with us, so we know that it's okay to be uniquely us.
And that's the biggest thing is if we lose our uniqueness, then we don't shine in the world the way that we really need to shine. And if we don't learn to value, we don't bring it to the forefront exactly where we do shine. Sometimes we don't even value our self-esteem. And it's interesting, so many conversations I have with people, and I do a lot of I'm invited to summits, I speak with groups where there's writers, and the biggest question that is asked is who would want to hear my story? Why? Because we don't ever really focus on where where our shiny point is, and where what we excel at, and where we make the difference. And I think our society is kind of geared that way, where we don't really focus on what we do right. We focus on what we are doing wrong, or what others perceive is that we're doing wrong.
Well, we are a wonderful society who, and as humans, we want to belong. Inclusivity is extremely important when you want community and feeling as if you belong. But I like to use the analogy, if you ever looked at any of the Marvel or DC Comics superhero teams, there's no redundancy. They're not trying to be like each other. They get celebrated for what makes them unique, and people know to depend on them for that, and they know not to step into somebody else's zone of genius. And so we are not taught to be unique superheroes, but yet we're made that way. We're all made, divinely made, to be unique.
We are.
And we don't take the time to find out what makes us unique enough to stand in that glory and say, this is who I am, and own it, and this is who I'm not, and I'm okay with that, and let it go.
Right. I always say that each of us have a treasured gifts that the world's just waiting to experience. We truly do. And if we take this approach that you're talking about, then I think it changes our own framework. When we realize that we do bring such value to the world, and yes, we can always improve on it, but still there are areas that only you can do. You're the only one that really could bring out that extra flavor, and shine where you shine.
Right. And we talk about diversity a lot, inclusivity, equality. We want there to be a visual difference and an ethnic and a cultural difference at the table to gain insights. But we found that we have more in common than we have different. Here's where we stop striving for more diversity internally, where we have a tendency to just keep it visual until we have more in common and then we get comfortable. Then we forget of where we should step in and shine from diversity of thought. We all think differently. We can scientifically prove that we all think. There's nobody who thinks the same. Even twins or quadruplets always think differently and uniquely. And we're not practicing bringing that into the conversation and honoring how we think. For example, my husband has a beautiful strength called positivity. Now, we're all positive. We know what positivity is. We can smile. We can be happy. But he literally wakes up looking at not just the glass is half full, the glass is refillable. Like, it'll work out. I have to choose that. It's not natural for me. I know this, so I have to give myself a lot more grace. If I wake up on the wrong side of the bed, it's like, okay, peace. Give me a minute. I will choose optimism. I will get there. But, don't expect me to be all positive, 5 seconds after I've woken up. He's like, it's a great day. And I'm like, I'm getting there. Just give me a little.
Give me a moment there.
It took me a while to self-accept that, because we have a tendency to want to adopt what we find attractive in other people, but you're also diffusing what makes you admirable from other people. So I think we forget that the gift of self-love, self-acceptance is not only giving it to others, but being willing to walk the talk. And this tool that I found useful for me, that I wrote the book about, was to help people get over the hurdle of, should I? And here's how to do it. Just here's how. And here's why. We got the why, but here's just how to do it. Because I think that's the hardest first step for people. It's like, where do I start?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, where do I start if self-acceptance? A lot of times you need to hear it from somebody else before it hits home, and you're like, yeah, I knew that about myself. I just didn't know there was a name for it. I didn't know that other people saw it too. Oh, good.
Oh, that's how it works. That is beautiful.
That's how it works.
Well, let's take just a short break so you can get a drink of water, because I've had you talking for a long time. We'll come back to this. I have some pretty interesting questions to ask from that point. But for those that are listening, be sure and pick up. We have the link going across the bottom of the screen. Be sure and pick up a copy of Carole's book. We are enjoying an amazing launch right now, and she's already been a bestseller. Now we're trying to help her get to #1 bestseller, and we're very excited about this. So we'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
Thanks.
All right, we're back together, and I was thinking about my daughter, who she's always saying, "Oh no, I've got more performance reviews," and it's something that everybody seems to dread. And she works for Arizona Oncology. She has 5 offices that she manages and does a lot of hiring, firing, and all of these things. And she's constantly like, oh, the situations. And I think this book she would really enjoy, because she's very, very good at what she does. But she's always talking about, my goodness, this was just crazy, what happened here, and I think that there's a lot of us in the situation that really work hard to be able to really make a difference, because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings just because of maybe something that you're having to give input on. You really want to make a difference for them, but sometimes we need a fresh perspective on it too.
True. From my prior HR roles, I think all HR professionals would love to see the performance review just go away. We'd like to see weekly conversations, catch things in real time, to have debriefs, when there's a big project that's ended, or on Fridays, hey, here's one thing you're doing really well. Here's one area of growth that I see for you as we get to the next phase. Being that performance reviews are here to stay, because legally we need to have something in the file saying you have actually had a conversation on your performance. There's a lot of people slow to change, and performance reviews get built in because they become a good static mark in the calendar. And here's what we're doing. Recency bias is alive and well, because in recency bias is only remembering what happened recently. So everybody gets really wigged out if there hasn't been something great happen right before the performance review. The interesting thing about this concept of better conversations, or asking for the things that you're doing right, is you can actually send an email to your boss at any time and say, hey, context, ask for the one thing, ask for an example, and gather those emails and just capture them in a file, and allow yourself to know to talk to those points in a performance review. From a leadership perspective, in reference to your daughter's job, is to be able to stop and make notes, and she can just say, context, one thing, remember this example from this client, and she can keep a file so that when they do performance reviews, it's actually an enjoyable conversation. She gets to share what she saw, have these notes, not fall into recency bias traps that is so common, and it's human. We're just human. And so when there's a performance review, and I'll stick with your daughter's perspective as a leader, and she needs to sit down and say, hey, on this, because everything kind of gets spelled out, pulled out. Hopefully somebody in HR has done a more recent job in analysis to know what you're being rated on accurately. As a boss, you can actually kind of say, okay, on this from 1 to 5, you're hitting a 4. And here's the one thing you can do to go from a 4 to 5. And here's an example of how I would recognize it. I'll share a really quick story about a story my husband shared with me. And he changed his leadership when he went into a performance review very early in his military career. He had a boss that liked to buck the system a little bit, so we're appreciative of that. And he walked into a performance review, and it was a military, so it's very standard. You know what to expect on a scale of 1 to 10. And this gentleman gave him his performance review, put it in front of him, and he saw where he had marked out all the numbers and circled 9 or 8. And that was very different. He was like, I'm not. And he goes, look, you're already meeting everything, solid 9s. I want to take the time to talk to you about how to get to 10. And so if you just look at this scale as a guideline and say, where do I want to start the conversation? Circle that and have a conversation of how you'll recognize them going to the next mark, if for lack of a better word. And when I heard that story,
that's fascinating. Yeah.
It changed the way he did performance reviews forevermore, because it was such a meaningful conversation, because when you felt validated for what you were doing well, didn't have to go into all the details. So you got validated, but now you get to the nuanced ways to go further. It's not a guessing game. I got 4s, woohoo! I have no idea how to get to 5s, right? We don't want that. We want there to be a conversation between two professionals of how to keep feeling challenged in a professional way moving forward.
I think we all want to grow. We don't, we all want to know, well, okay, give me some constructive criticism on how I can grow and make a difference.
And, even when someone tells you what you do well, hey, you're great here. You can literally say, can you give me an example of how you could see me improving there? So you're kind of combining both. Thank you for that offer, that compliment. Can you give me an example how you saw it recently? And
beautiful.
A lot of times we'll get a compliment, but we won't know how to put it to use because we don't see it from their perspective. So asking for an example anytime you get a compliment, even from a client, hey, I really enjoyed working with you. Can you give me an example of the moment the most recent time you enjoyed working together? What were we doing? What made you enjoy that? It gives you a whole wonderful world of context that's very rich, other than just saying, oh, thanks.
Yeah, oh, that's good. I think that this also can translate very well to family life and how we speak with our children, our mates. It gives a different, I think you even talk about it in your book, how you can take the same information, apply it in the family, and how beneficial that could be.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was recently talking with another mom, and she was talking about the book, and she goes, I'm so grateful you had a chapter on how to do this with your family, because I wouldn't have thought about it. And the thing that came up in our conversation was teenagers. Teenagers are trying to branch out on their own. They're trying to look for their individuality. How can I be belonged and loved by this family, but find out who I am and not like my mom or dad, because there's things I don't like about what we do. And so often we get into this dynamic of just telling them what to do. We forget to ask them questions. So this is a brilliant concept to turn around and say, you can ask them a question. Hey, what's the one thing that happened in school today that you enjoyed? And can you give me an example of how you saw that? You can pull out of them their smaller stories that they won't think you're interested in, just so you can learn about them. But the moment you see them do something really well, you can say, hey, yesterday when you were on the phone with grandma, I heard you share this one thing that made her laugh. And I just want to let you know it warms my heart when I see you doing that. It means that you're family friendly, that you're showing love to her, you're sharing your life with her. And I just want you to know that I saw that, right? And you go on. But that story solidifies for them something they're doing that has meaning. And you're planting seeds of how you see them as a growing, caring human being. And they need to collect those more than the conformity issues in social media. especially I think in spite of social media, we have to plant seeds of how we see them as contributing, valuable, growing young adults. And we don't do that enough because we get into our habits of trying to help them be better.
Oh, that's right.
They can grow up.
And my daughter's in her 30s, and she has tons of responsibility. And when I started asking her, so what was awesome in your day today? It was like the first time I did that to her, she looked at me instead of just, how was your day? And then hearing all the stories of, oh my God, this happened. What was just really awesome today? And, it changed, and we had some really interesting conversations because I could see her stop and kind of reflect and then start talking about something that would, instead of focusing on, oh man, this happened and that happened and this person did this, so it changed the trajectory of the conversation, and I still, whenever I ask her that way, see kind of like the lights looking a different way, and it's like, wow.
Well, you've just tapped onto the neuroscience of appreciative inquiry. And there's an entire institute on this and research. And what they found was just like you had your experience. When you ask someone a specific about what's going right, what was your favorite thing that happened today? What was the most wonderful food you tasted? Anything that's on a positive, there's actually neuroscience. There's chemicals that are released in the brain that are completely different than the ones that are induced by stress and negativity. The brilliant thing about asking people what's going right, what's their most favorite, what was the most meaningful, anything on the positive spectrum, is that right after that, they are their most creative and problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you take this idea of asking for what's the one thing we're doing right with the client, what's the one thing we're doing wrong with this project, what's the one thing that we did hit on the Friday deadline, if you start meetings off with asking what's going right, what's positive, it balances out the weight of anything that's a problem, balances out the negativity. So you have an appreciation for what's going right. So when you start to look at the problems, it's with fresh eyes, a new balanced perspective, and you become more creative because you're remembering what worked, and you're going to start implementing the things that have worked before into a new, innovative, creative way. So we found that, so part of the research of why we need to ask for what we're doing well is part of that appreciative inquiry, which was the research behind how to make teams more agile, more engaging, and more innovative.
I have an author that's publishing in mid-July. His book is fascinating, and it's called Cracking the Learning Code.
Nice.
And his book, he talks a lot about the same thing. And his idea is, and he's a scientist, he's got all the science behind everything in this book. It's going to turn into, this first book is just huge. It's like 750 pages because he's talking about the science behind it. But he has little indicators within each chapter that if you feel like you've got the picture, you can stop reading the rest of that chapter and go on to the next. But it's going to end up in 20 smaller books, and he's got courses to translate into it. But what's fascinating is that he works on the same premise, and he feels that when you strike up the point of what a person's truly interested in, what they're fascinated by, their learning skyrockets. And this is the same premise with this, is by speaking about the good things, the things that they like and that they're familiar with, it makes all the difference.
I was just recently listening to a podcast, and I also listened to a lot of books audibly. And Adam Grant brought up a point about the best debaters. They find what you have in common, and then they ask questions. They put the scientist hat on. And by putting a scientist hat on and asking questions about what somebody's interested in, finding that common point where they're there with you, then you have built in more trust in the conversation. And then their mind automatically opens to, where can that grow? Where can we go with that? And so there's quite a lot of learning hacks I think we're starting to really want to address so that we have better conversations, we have better learning, we understand how to prove or open people's minds up to new points of information by starting with the positive. Either what do you like, what are you interested in, or what do we have in common? What do we both agree on first?
Absolutely. And one of the things that he has said that, which takes us even further, is that it's kind of that pleasure point, but that even memories, it takes it to a different part of the brain, and you never forget these kind of things. Whereas if you sit in a situation where it's focused on the things you're not interested in, or focused on where you're going wrong, the criticism doesn't stick with you. It does maybe in a self-esteem type of thing, but the memories don't stay.
Right. When you
create different neural pathways.
I think what I just heard you say that I really have found valuable is that even if somebody comes at you with original statement that seems like criticism, if you can step into it,
right,
and say, can you give me an example of how you saw that?
I think that's beautiful. Yeah.
Right. Can you help me understand what you prefer to see differently? How would you like this to be different? If you could just step into it with curiosity and not take it personally, which is hard, you got this. But with knowledge comes more power to know this isn't about me, it's about them. Criticism always comes. Anything negative coming from somebody else, it's about them. They're frustrated, they've got emotions, and you're just in the mix. But being able to step back into it is a gift, and it does give the results that you'll remember. You won't even remember how the conversation started.
Right.
You'll remember what you learned.
You remember what you learned.
Right.
Right. So when you teach this to those that you work with, how is this information received? How are people responding to this information?
What's interesting is that I'm offering a way to communicate that they've never even thought of. So in coaching, you ask a lot of questions. And so I get to ask a question like, what would you want to ask? What would you want to know? Who would you think would have a good viewpoint of you at your best? Would you like to collect that information? You have to really understand if they're curious enough to do it, and then say, well, how would you do it? And if they're really stuck, I will say, okay, let me put my HR hat on and guide you through an exercise that might be helpful. And then I go, well, let me put my coach hat back on. What's challenging about that for you? And really see where their head is. But by giving them a tool that they can start to wrap their head around, then it becomes an experiment. Well, do you want to try this experiment? Just go ask this one person. Ask for 5 minutes at a time. Ask one question. Walk away. And what has happened is people come like, oh my God, I never knew that how much they really valued my input. I never knew that they counted on me for this. I never knew that they were depending on me to do this because it made life easy for them. I never knew comes up a lot. And it's a positive I never knew. And so a lot of times they'll forget even the method to get the information, just that they got the information. And I'll get an email like, what was that formula again that I used? They're just, like you said, remembering the good part of what they learned, not how they got there. So I'm like, okay, it's right here. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So you've had some pretty amazing results. Can you share maybe one person's experience and what really transpired from that?
There was a leader I was coaching who really aspired to get to the C-suite, and they were being groomed for it. I mean, they knew that this person had the potential, but they did not have any self-awareness of how much other people appreciated their work. And so we used this experiment. We were already doing a customized 360. But I said, in the meantime, why don't you do this experiment to people that aren't in this 360? even if they are, you're comfortable with them, whatever. Go to your family, your friends, past peers, people who have worked with you before. And what came back was just an elevated confidence that suddenly they heard like third party credibility, like, you're really a rock star. You don't know this? Girl, this is what you do so well. Here's the one thing I love the most. Here's what I brag about you the most. And that's just was shocking for a lot of people who get stuck in their own heads to hear. But what came back was the confidence to go to her boss and like, I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the very next opportunity offered that C-suite position and got it. So it's a confidence booster in like a great vitamin shot. You get to hear something that you're already doing. You don't have to do anything differently. You're being who you are, but suddenly somebody's showing you through a different lens that you go, wow, they really appreciated that. I'm actually doing all the things that I thought I was trying to do. It's validation.
And validation is so powerful, it turns it changes people when they're with the validation, and often inspires them to reach new heights of growth because they were validated. And I think in the workforce, if we have that, even if for people that work like at Walmart and those type of places, if you implement it even there, then those employees are going to always strive to do even better and to grow and to make a big difference and not stay in that place.
Right. The metaphor that's recently come up for me is that if you were to take each person's positive input of what they enjoy about you, enjoy about your work, appreciate about your presence, and look at them as building blocks where you're building a staircase. Once you've built that staircase and know what other people have really valued about you, it's a lot easier to climb up that stairs.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. What a difference. So in a few words, how would you sum up this book you've written?
This book is written with a tangible, simple formula to give you a framework to ask anything you want from anybody at any time, to start to collect all the little things that make you your own superhero.
Beautiful. Wow, that was really good. And so now that the book is launched, what's next for you?
So that's a fun question, because there's another book that I would really like to do based on case studies from people who used the information in the first book. So if readers of this book put it to use, I'd love to hear that and collect those stories and put them in a book of how this has worked for people. What challenges came up? We're human. What got in the way? But what did it allow you to overcome as well? I just got an email from a gentleman. He's like, I'm on chapter 6, and I teach an MBA class, and I'm already implementing, the superhero file and performance review conversations into my coursework. And I was like, can I use you as a case study for book number 2? And he's like, sure. So this is what I think when you have a concept you put out in the world, the proof of a concept is to write about what it did for people, what got in the way, how they overcame it, and for me to learn how to coach this as well. I think it's a brilliant opportunity for book number 2.
I think that's awesome. And, I really admire you for, I always say that it's our responsibility to be the impactful influencers that in the world. Our world needs us. We need each one of us. And I think I have probably the best job in the world as far as getting to work with some of the most amazing authors. Because, like last week's book launch was on diversity and 12 steps to diversity recovery. And she had an international audience listening and she's involved internationally because it's such a major issue. I have a gentleman that's doing a 4-part series on healing from burnout, just how to get through. He's been a nurse for many years, but now he's in higher positions, but he's been really observing since COVID happened what's happening with people. But I'm going to make sure that these authors also know about this book, because I think it fits with everything that they are also doing. So, it's pretty exciting to see what's coming to the world and what's at our fingertips right now.
Yeah, if I can change the performance review conversation so that both people walk out of it feeling invigorated, renewed, and in a better place because of that conversation, then I will feel completely successful.
That's beautiful. And so share with those that are listening or going to be listening to this, how do people get in touch with you? How do they reach out to you? How are they going to get to know you if they want to work with you?
Well, I'm really involved in LinkedIn, so please join me on LinkedIn, and I have a Facebook page as well. I have a website. We're refreshing it right now, but it's relevant-insight.com. And so between LinkedIn and social media and
your website and your book.
And the book, definitely the book.
And it's scrolling across the bottom, and it does have links to all her stuff in there.
That's right. It's on Amazon, and this is the week that we're launching. So I'm just so honored that people are interested in learning about a new book out in the world that can help you have a better conversation.
And so, any final words of wisdom that you want to share with listeners as far as just the impact that you want them to experience from this? Because you've pretty well encapsulated all of it, but is there any final words that you wanted to share?
I think if I could help people understand that anybody who comes up to you and projects onto you any negative statement, it is never about you. And if it's not about you, would it make you brave enough to step into the conversation for them to be able to tell you what really is bothering them? Because it's never you. It's always something they are experiencing. And I just don't know if we're practiced at that conversation. I'm hoping this turns the tide.
Very beautiful. Well, I can't thank you enough for this beautiful conversation. And the launch is going on all week. Actually, we're having another Facebook Live on Wednesday. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. And actually, this is a time to really treasure and celebrate what you're bringing to the world. And I thank you, because I've learned a lot from this, and I am going to be sharing it. I've got a lot of stuff out there sharing this out, but I'm going to be making sure I personally contact a few people that I think they would truly enjoy. Carole, thank you for a beautiful conversation. And just know that there's a lot of people that can really gain from your message, and I thank you for what you bring.
No, I'm honored to be here. Thank you too.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is the end of our broadcast, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you.